Welcome back to the House of Kayfabe. I am the other Steve, and right up front, we would like to welcome about 500 extra subs because unless you've been living under a rock, Stephen P. New is the man who's been calls and all this. And I would like to welcome you all to the House of Kayfabe, along with everyone else who's been here. I am the other Steve, and I am, of course, with the trial chief, a man who is so famous the state of West Virginia named a river after him, Stephen P. New. I say it every time. These are my favorite videos that we do on this channel because I tried to do law school for a little while. Well, pre-law, I guess. And I'm not smart enough, but I'm definitely interested in it.
That's bull. You missed your calling, other Steve.
Well, I get to, now I can just, talk to you about it. So Stephen P. New,
Live vicariously.
I do. I keep up with your court cases. I'm like, who did you depose today, Steve? What governor did you put in the hot seat today, Steve? So we're going to be
coming up next month.
Are you okay? We can't do that. Okay, so we'll talk offline. We're going to be talking today about the MLW antitrust case against the WWE. I think this has been in the background because so many big things have happened in the sport of pro wrestling. We're going to be dealing with monopolies. We're going to be dealing with antitrust. Now, Steve, as I always say, I want you to kind of approach this like if you're a visiting professor at one of your two alma maters. And before we talk about the details of the case, which I guess you'll talk about the details of the case when you unfurl this, what is antitrust and what is monopolies?
Well, a monopoly is considered to be when a company has so much of a market share, they have the market cornered such that they can just use their size, their influence to control so much. Going back, you looked at, the classic case, Standard Oil, the Rockefellers, and just, that much control of something that has to do with national security. And the federal government said, we can't have that much of something that's so crucial to our national security in the hands of one guy, John David Rockefeller. And we're going to bust Standard Oil up. Now, you and I laugh that Rockefeller actually benefited from Standard Oil being busted up. But it's basically, you can't have a company that's so large that its failure would affect something like national security or the economy. And of course, the Sherman Antitrust Act is only as strong as the Department of Justice wants it to be in trying to enforce things like monopolies or slow down or tap the brakes on mergers and acquisitions. And beginning in the 90s, when the stock market was firing on all 8 cylinders, you saw a lot more relaxation in the Federal Trade Commission and a lot of that kind of stuff that would have prevented these companies from getting so large, or there only being 4 large telecom companies or 2 large soda companies, or from the 30s to the 80s, everybody thought that the more competition there was, the better off it was ultimately for the consumer and for all the things that Bill Clinton was or was not. His DOJ did not aggressively attempt to bust up or to stop those mergers, acquisitions. What ends up eventually becoming monopoly. Now, luckily, I think for the professional wrestling industry, I think that no one in the mainstream, especially probably not politics, is going to be worried about whether or not one company or the other becomes a monopoly of this crazy business called professional wrestling, right? Or sports entertainment, whatever you want to call it. So, it kind of flies under the radar screen just a little bit until this lawsuit by Major League Wrestling, Court Bauer, against World Wrestling Entertainment, alleging that WWE uses its position as the largest company like that in the world to force other media partners to only partner with it, or to secure buildings or deny buildings to be run by other wrestling companies, so on and so forth. So that's kind of the kickoff of all of this, Steve. It's not like before we get somebody in the comments going, well, news out there talking about antitrust now. I looked on his website. No, I'm not an antitrust lawyer, but I'm smart enough to read a complaint that's been filed and understand what the allegations are. And yeah, it's been since law school that I read the Sherman Antitrust Act, or just brushed up on it. I don't pretend to have every case that's ever been decided under that act, or California's act, which they sued under, committed to memory or anything like that. So I just kind of wanted to preface that from the beginning, Steve. And also, to the extent someone might be saying, hey, Steve New used to advertise Major League Wrestling. He's hardly an object. Yeah, I used to advertise on Major League Wrestling. I like Court Bauer. I like MSL. I met MJF at MLW when Cornette was announcing there in April of 2019. I met Selena De La Renta and, the other members of the Dynasty, Hammerstone and Richard Holiday. And they were just, young kids. And I was up there in July of 21 or 22 also. But I've had nothing to do with this case of Major League Wrestling versus World Wrestling Entertainment.
So real quick, and we'll just touch on it for a second. That's been the criticism of the Sherman Act, is that it is left up to the discretion of whoever's running the government at the time.
Right. It's whether that attorney general with that presidential vision makes those kinds of things, busting up perceived monopolies, standing in the way of and objecting to mergers and acquisitions, a priority for that administration.
So this case basically, was MLW saying that the WWE's huge market share was keeping them out of, I think, specifically figure deals and television deals. Now, I am offline. Me and Steve New, we argue a lot about politics. If you notice, neither one of us has called each other an idiot for a while. We've got to get back on that.
Yes,
I will
New Year's resolutions called Marker an idiot.
So I will be doing the devil's advocate here. Isn't the existence of AEW proof that the WWE does not have a full monopoly and it's not an antitrust case?
Well, sure. If you are a billionaire like Shad Khan or Tony Khan, his son, or what have you, you too, ladies and gentlemen, can start your own wrestling company and leverage your contacts with your soccer club and your NFL team and get yourself a deal on Warner Brothers Discovery. You too can start your own rival to World Wrestling Entertainment. Apparently, it just takes about $184 million a year to make $150 million. And yes, you can certainly do that. And you'll be the number 2 guy behind World Wrestling Entertainment. And you'll still get sent to the number 2 building in that marketplace. Well, congratulations.
So the argument would be that the level of entry is so high that someone like Court Bauer and MSL, back in the day, I watched or listened to their podcasts a lot. That's where Jim Cornette's podcast came from, was from the MLW Podcast Network. And then I think they got moved to Podcast One, I think. So we know that MLW doesn't have, as far as I know, Court Bauer's dad is not a billionaire. We're on the Forbes list. So you just were arguing from their side just now, basically,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah, because that was WWE's arguments in the motion to dismiss, was the exact argument that you just made, is that, look, here's All Elite Wrestling. They run X number of shows a year. They have X number of superstars under contract. They have, they run these buildings, and they're on these TV networks. And so, so that was WWE's argument in the what's called Rule 12b-6 motion to dismiss. It's the initial motion that tests the sufficiency of the lawsuit, and that motion was denied. The MLW actually survived the 12Bs. I think there may have been a portion that was dismissed, and the judge allowed them to reshape their complaint some or refine their allegations some and refile. But the long and short of it was MLW was going to be able to get into discovery with the WWE, which also included some spicy allegations that Stephanie McMahon and others had reached out to networks like A&E and others where WWE has some footprint or some programming and said, hey, we don't want you to give MLW a slot there. You know, Court, if you look at Court's Twitter over the last few years, there was always some major announcement coming, right? Major announcement on its way, and then it never came. And so I think that a lot of that was stuff like, well, we've got to deal with some TV network like A&E to put MLW on there because there's clearly an appetite for wrestling product, and then that wouldn't pan out. Now, that's more of what's called, ladies and gentlemen, tortious interference.
Damn it, I was trying to say it first.
Relation. I should have let you. But yeah, so I mean, even if there is a prospect of having a deal, if you have this behemoth corporation come in and tell A&E, hey, you can't show the treasure hunt show, or we're not going to give you, you know, whatever for Dark Side of the Ring, Vice, or what have you, you know, that is MLW saying we're being interfered with here.
Well, now that you say it like that, and I do know at least more than the usual layman about the John D. Rockefeller Standard Oil case, and what you just described is exactly what he was doing. He was going to like a new railroad company and said, hey, if you want to roll my oil, you can't do anybody else's oil, and I'm the biggest, and you want my account. So if that is actually true, that's just the Standard Oil case.
Yeah, and it really is. And I think WWE didn't want to start to get into that and have MLW's lawyers start to peel that onion, because I know that with Live Nation and some other vendors, the ticket sales, the building runs, and things like that, there were tons of documents subpoenaed, and Live Nation immediately moved to quash that subpoena to say, give us all of your correspondence with WWE for the last 10 years, or whatever the subpoena said. And Live Nation moved to quash that subpoena. So there would have been a whole lot more of that kind of stuff, going on, because you start usually in a case, in a civil lawsuit like the ones that I do, you start with the paper, right? You start with the documents first and the paper discovery, what you know or what you suspect, and you ask the other side to admit it or deny it, and you ask them to turn over all of these documents of what you suspect, and you just keep digging, and you don't do depositions until you're fairly sure that you've got about 90% of the documents that you're going to need, and you just hope that through digging through all of that stuff that you find some silver bullets. And that's the process of discovery in a civil case. So WWE clearly did not want MLW going through its finances, its contracts with certain people. And it sounds to me like they especially didn't want the correspondence gone through.
Well, if you all are digging what we do, and again, thank you for subscribing and checking us out. Please give us a like, a comment, and share. And go back in the history. There's actually a spiffy Stephen P. new playlist. And maybe last year, you did a video by yourself on your phone while you were on the road somewhere, chasing down the bad guy. And you are seeming very prescient right now because you thought this had legs, because a huge corporation monolith like, TKO now, which is, I guess it's a TKO case. People don't realize that they have dozens, hundreds of cases that are attempted every year, right?
Sure.
We've heard so many times that, CTE and concussion cases have been brought so many times, and they've all been dismissed with extreme prejudice. And back then, you said you thought they had something here. What was it with the stuff that you read back then? It was over a year ago. Why did you think that there might be something here?
Because I'm old and I know the way that McMahon ran all of those guys out of the business in the 80s and shut down territories and that kind of thing. I had no reason to think that he wasn't just as ruthless as a publicly traded corporation. I had no reason to think that Stephanie McMahon wasn't just as ruthless as her father and would have no qualms about picking up the phone or even, God forbid, sending an email and saying, hey, if you make a deal with Major League Wrestling, we're not going to supply the Treasure Hunter show to you. I had no doubts. I mean, it's just who I think the McMahons are and how ruthless they've been in business. Although, just like with the illegal paralegal and some other things, in the modern world, there always seems to be a paper trail, Steve.
So, also WWE, very famous for not settling. They don't settle. So I think that, the reason why this isn't a bigger story is because you're in a Twitter war with Chris Jericho and you've been outed as Ace Steel and CM Punk's, lawyer. But I think that this is a very large deal because they are, and I want to get into this with you. It can't be seen as a settlement, and this may be, just law 099, not even 101. That can't be seen as an admission of fact, a tacit admission that yes, we are fucking around behind the scenes, a la John D. Rockefeller.
Sure, and I'm sure there was probably a 200 or 300 page release and settlement agreement here, with all kinds of whereofs and wherefores and thereofs, and confidentiality out the wazoo, and no admissions of liability and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think that nobody will ever be able to talk about it. I don't think it's going to be the kind of thing, as Cornette said, where you're going to see Court Bauer flying around on a Learjet next month or anything like that. But obviously, I think Court will be able to prop up MLW for a good while longer. And also, last thing WWE will want to do now is interfere with MLW trying to get a spot on a TV network or something like that, because it would be not only what they alleged before, but also could be, if their lawyers, if MLW's lawyers were smart, negotiated in that WWE wouldn't try to do this kind of thing anymore and prohibit MLW from advancing in the market. Now, one of the other things about this, release and settlement agreement is the terms are confidential. Everybody will be sworn to it. That's standard in this. But yes, it absolutely, as you indicated, Steve, no admission of liability whatsoever. So it's highly doubtful that a TNA or an AEW or somebody like that would try to follow in MLW's footsteps. The interesting case is CW with the NWA. I think Billy Corgan announced, hey, we've got a deal with the CW. And then boom, before you know it, NXT's on the CW. And NWA is on the CW streaming service. So, be careful. A deal is not a deal until the ink is dry. And so, that's kind of my 2 cents on that, Steve.
A deal is not a deal until you have the sinister minister doing cocaine with hookers in the back room, and then therefore, scaring off the network. That was such a bonehead, dumb thing. And, we are the old heads here in the House of Kayfabe. We are fans now because of the strength of the NWA product in the 80s. And I think that we both, with all of our heart, root for that to go on. And I gotta say, when the God Emperor Cornette was announcing, I thought it was a pretty good product. I watched it
Yeah,
on YouTube,
yeah,
but
and I thought it had a really good chance, and then boom, along comes COVID and wrecks everything. But you go back to October of 19, and the Rock and Roll win the World Tag Titles, and Jimmy's announcing, and Nick Aldis is your world champion, and you've got L.A. Knight, there on the roster.
Eli
It was
Drake.
yeah, Eli Drake, and you would have thought that was money,
It was.
and it just didn't work out that way, because if COVID doesn't hit, Billy Corgan can get some kind of a TV deal with somebody like the CW who's wanted to get into sports. They do ACC sports, things like that now. That real NWA could have really postured itself well at that point with a TV deal, stream on YouTube TV. I like this idea. We talked about it for a long time. Billy Corgan reconstituting the territories. Be interesting to see if he's got enough people out there throughout the country who can legitimately put an NWA territory together. But I guess time will tell.
So getting back to the case real quick, and we're going to wrap it up because I do want to talk about the MLW product itself because you are familiar with it. You were almost an on-air talent at one point. These acronyms are running all over the IWC. Is an NDA a usual thing that will be signed, pretty standard with these kind of settlements?
Oh, absolutely. There will be multiple pages of confidentiality clauses, probably only, the uppermost members of management will even see the settlement agreement or know its terms, and they won't be able to speak about it.
Okay, so to wrap us up here, we've got Derek, the human wrestling encyclopedia, who doesn't watch anything but wrestling, and I wish he was here to with this part of the conversation. I've heard all of these grumblings that there's some real talent in the MLW, or yeah, in MLW, like Hammerstone and Jacob Fatu, like the Von Erichs, Kevin's sons were at least
Ross
there
and
for
Mark.
a little while. What do you think about some of the talent that they have at MLW?
Yeah, they've always had really great talent. Hammerstone, MJF, Richard Holiday, in a group called Dynasty. And the problem was when AEW came along, Court couldn't compete with Tony Khan's pocketbook. I watched the Lucha Brothers. I met the Lucha Brothers.
Oh, did they come from MLW?
Yep. They came from MLW as well, and they had a lot. Jacob Fatu, very talented individual under contract with MLW. So it's not that they. I mean, even superstars like Willow Nightingale. I saw Willow Nightingale wrestle when I went up to Philadelphia to MLW for tapings a couple of years ago, and met her. A very nice young lady, and they've always had good talent on the roster, but it's really hard to go up against, Tony Khan's pocketbook and to keep those guys there under a rather modest contract, even if they're able to say wrestle on the indies. Like Richard Holiday's been to All-Star Wrestling in Madison. He put on a great match with Matt Cardona, I believe. And they do have a lot of talent in MLW, and MSL and Court Bauer know what they're doing. The Von Erichs were there. The Von Erichs were on AEW recently. I don't know where Ross and Marshall will end up. I can tell you that there's never been two nicer kids. I mean, they are pure Von Erich, just the nicest kids in the world, Kevin's sons. And they had a really good run in MLW for a long time, as did Selena De La Renta. She had a great run with her faction in MLW, and she hasn't shown up anywhere else yet. But it's hard for a company like MLW, even if you tell your talent, we're going to pay you this base for this many appearances a year, and you can wrestle the indies. If a bigger name comes calling, not necessarily an NWA or a TNA or something like that, but if an AEW or WWE comes calling, it's hard to keep them.
Well, I know that, being a longtime listener back then of MLW when it was a podcast, I'd never heard of Mr. St. Laurent, but I know that Court Bauer was, a former writer at WWE. I think he has a great wrestling mind. It's one thing, and I almost always agree with the great Brian Last. He has a real hard on for Court Bauer, and I don't know why.
I don't either.
Right? If we ever get him on the show, I think we should get TGBL on the show one day.
I mean, unless it's one of these things like Cornette has a string of girlfriends,
and he didn't like his ex-girlfriend.
Thinks that hey, that's Corny's ex-girlfriend. He puts her right there, puts Court Bauer there with Alice Radley and the whole rest of them. He's like a super jealous girlfriend.
One of the things that I like about MLW and not knowing anything and seeing a few matches on YouTube, it really seemed like, and it's so easy for every promotion to get safe and bring in the retirement community. And MLW seems like it was all or is up and comers. We don't have anybody coming here that are, former big names in the business. It really does seem like something like NXT, but it's not, I know it's not
it's not a developmental territory. Now, occasionally, they'll pick up a guy like Enzo.
But even then, that guy should still be on the come up. Enzo Amore should be in a major federation right now.
That's exactly right. Who was the hype man for Bobby Lashley? What was that kid's name? The guy.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So, guys like that who've been in WWE or something. But you're right. It's still young guys. It's not,
We know what we're talking about here. We know what we're inferring.
Sure. It's not George South or Ricky Morton. And I love both of those guys.
I do too.
You're not going to see those guys at MLW. And that's just kind of Court's mindset. A guy like Filthy Tom Lawler, great MLW superstar. I mean, man, Lawler can talk. He can go.
He's a legitimate badass because he's a UFC guy.
Yeah.
So there you go, you guys. I hope you all enjoyed all that. Again, thank you all so much for coming to the House of Kayfabe and finally finding us. It only took Stephen Pinu becoming the lawyer of the most famous wrestler in the world right now for y'all to find us and the algorithm to bless us, but we're glad that they did. So for Stephen Pinu and the rest of the residents of the House of Kayfabe, I am the other Steve, and we'll see you next time.